Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today I want to invite you to step into my shoes for just a moment. Imagine looking back through the generations of our indigenous ancestors, people who lived in perfect harmony with their ancestral lands for centuries, possessing incredibly rich, distinct cultures. Today, we're exploring a vital piece of history that, honestly, rarely makes it into mainstream textbooks in all its depth. It's the story of how our people faced a quiet, almost invisible, but entirely devastating conquest. You see, while we were never formally or completely colonized by the British Empire in the traditional sense, the towering shadow of the East India Company fundamentally altered who we are as a people.
So here's the big question. How exactly did our community lose its distinct identity, its lands, and its centuries-old traditions, without a total military takeover? I mean, this is the absolute heart of our journey today. It's a tragedy of historical proportions. Through this incredibly complex web of treaties, strategic political interference, and overwhelming cultural influence, the demographics and the very soul of our indigenous populations were permanently transformed by British India. Let's uncover exactly how this unseen colonization actually unfolded.
Section 1. The Sugauli Treaty and Land Loss.
Okay, let's dive right into this first major blow to our ancestral lands, which wasn't just a subtle shift in politics, it was a violent, physical tearing apart of our home.
To truly get this, we've got to trace the timeline back to the Anglo-Nepalese War. It kicked off in 1814, a fierce, desperate conflict where our ancestors fought literally tooth and nail to protect their native soil. But by 1816, the war ended, and the infamous Sugauli Treaty was signed. What's absolutely staggering here is that the terms were essentially dictated to our rulers under the threat of complete annihilation. It was drafted rapidly purely to neuter our regional power. This treaty wasn't just a piece of diplomatic paper, right? It was a devastating line drawn right through the heart of our original sovereign territories. The reality? Our lands were slashed by nearly half. We're talking about a vast, beautiful expanse stretching all the way from the Sutlej River in the west, right across to the Teesta River in the east. In the blink of an eye, millions of our indigenous people who had lived freely for countless generations suddenly woke up to find themselves falling under direct British imperial rule or heavy influence. Our homes were instantly no longer fully ours.
Section 2. Lahori Culture Exodus of Youth. So let's see how this physical loss builds into an even deeper wound, the extraction of our human capital, which started almost right after 1815.
You see, British forces were actually deeply impressed by the bravery and resilience of our indigenous warriors during the war. And what followed was the birth of what's known as labor hue culture, the systematic recruitment of our indigenous youth into foreign armies. Now, I really want to stress this wasn't just, offering military jobs to young men. It was a calculated, systematic extraction of our strongest, most capable youth, drawing them far away to fight someone else's battles across the globe. Well, those foreign armies grew significantly stronger, completely empowered by the capability, loyalty, and bravery of our youth. Our own villages back home were left severely depleted. Think about it. The sudden and sustained loss of our young men meant our agriculture, which was the absolute lifeblood of our indigenous communities, began to weaken drastically. Our village social structures began to crack under the pressure, leaving families struggling to survive without their most able-bodied members. Whole generations of fathers and sons were just gone. Section 3. Religious Encroachment and Identity Crisis. Now, the extraction wasn't just physical. As our borders were redrawn and our youth were taken, a brand new invasion began, a spiritual and cultural encroachment on our ancestral ways of life. Now, it's important to note that formal permission for Christian proselytizing wasn't officially granted within our borders. Yet, honestly, the damage was still being done. The establishment of the British residency and the reality of open borders with British India brought intense, unseen cultural pressures. External cultural and religious forces just began to seep through those porous borders, slowly and quietly influencing our local populations. We suffered a profound shift away from our authentic spiritual identity. For generations upon generations, we held deep connections to nature worship, the Bon religion, and Buddhism. That was us. That was who we were. But there were a combination of state policies and external pressures. Our people were increasingly pushed toward Hinduization and Western Christianity. It was a systematic erosion and replacement of our authentic spiritual identity, essentially chipping away at the very core of our community's soul. Section 4.
1854, Muluki Ain, and marginalization. Sadly, this cultural suppression wasn't solely driven by outsiders. External pressure from the British combined perfectly with the policies of our own domestic rulers to formalize this cultural destruction right into national law. Before 1854, our indigenous communities operated largely as egalitarian, non-caste societies, incredibly rich with distinct native languages and vibrant, unique cultures. But the introduction of Jung Bahadur Rana's Muluki Ain in 1854 violently restructured our society. It imposed this rigid Hindu caste hierarchy that completely dismantled our previous egalitarian ways. This legal code literally made it a punishable offense to live out many of our traditional customs, systematically forcing conformity upon us. So, the crucial point in all of this marginalization is the legal label Mahuwali or Matwali. This was a newly invented, lower-tier categorization legally forced onto our indigenous people. The state didn't just ignore us, they actively downgraded us. Our unique traditions, languages, and cultures were suddenly deemed inferior by law, actively destroying our social standing and legally marginalizing our ancestors right in their very own homeland. Section 5. Indigenous diaspora in foreign lands. And this systemic marginalization at home pushed our people even further out. Let's look at the final, enduring consequence of these historical forces, the tragic and wide-scale scattering of our indigenous people. Because of their service in the Gorkha regiments, thousands of our ancestors were uprooted and resettled far, far away from their homes. Entire communities were moved to places like Assam, Dehradun, Darjeeling, and even as far away as Burma. They were planted in foreign soils, cut off entirely from the rivers, hills, and mountains that birthed their culture. Perhaps the most painful part of our story is what happened to the next generations. Distanced from their motherland, they began to slowly forget. They forgot the distinct native languages their grandmothers spoke. They forgot the ancestral rituals that connected them to the earth. This cultural amnesia among the diaspora wasn't just a sad accident of time. It represented a massive, irreversible blow to our indigenous population numbers and to our collective heritage. When we step back and look at the overarching diplomatic and social strategies of the East India Company and the British Empire, this is what we're left with. This is the true cost: a fractured land, a scattered people, and an erased heritage. It's a remarkably heavy price that our indigenous communities paid, a quiet colonization that reshaped our destiny and diminished our originality without the British ever planting a single flag of total conquest over our capital. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. How do we reclaim an identity that was slowly, methodically dismantled by laws we didn't write and borders we never chose? The physical empire of those days might be gone, but the long shadows it cast on our ancestral heritage remain vividly with us today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this journey has helped you deeply understand the hidden, personal price of our history. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and I'll see you in the next one.